Our text this morning is actually the Epiphany text, where Epiphany is the 6th of January, and so this Sunday is always a kind of hybrid. So we have to decide how much of Epiphany we want to talk about and how much of the baptism of the Lord, because baptism of the Lord follows the Sunday after Epiphany. But because Epiphany is a particular day, the 6th of January, you'd only ever hear about Epiphany once every 7 years. And if there was if the Jaguars were in the playoffs or something, you wouldn't even hear that particular year because you'd all be at the Jaguar game. But don't worry about that. Yeah, that may be the best line of the morning. What we usually talk about when we talk about the Epiphany passage is the gold, frankincense, and the myrrh, and how Jesus got his college fund paid for, which is that was an attempt at the best line of the morning, but I'd already been upstage. The gold, frankincense, and myrrh always fascinates people. The wise men are always a fascinating topic. Today, however, I want to talk a little bit about the more edgy side of Epiphany, which is the flight into Egypt. Now, before that, I want to say something about Herod. It's very important to understand how Herod operated and what his significance was historically. Those of you who watched Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor and Cleopatra, anybody in the house seen that movie? One or two of you? Well, so you have a little bit of the context because you remember Richard Burton was Mark Antony. And Antony was originally he was a partner with Octavian, who later became known as Augustus, and they sort of carved up the Roman Empire together, and one person took the west, that is Augustus, Octavian, and Antony took the east. But over time, there came to be an intense animus that grew between the two leaders, such that civil war broke out within Rome. And the reason this is important is because Herod was on the side of Antony. He was on Richard Burton's side in the conflict. He was a ruthless leader. He was a leader that was able to create armies of Jewish mercenaries. They were some of the most prized fighting people in the ancient world, and Herod got them, mustered them, trained them, armed them, and would send them forward to go sometimes in battle for money. Other times he would send them forward to do battle on behalf of Antony. But Antony lost at the Battle of Actium between Octavian's forces and Antony's forces. Antony lost, and he was hounded and chased, and finally Octavian's forces took over Egypt and killed Antony and killed Cleopatra. And Herod should have been the next one to go, because Herod really was Antony's right arm. But among Herod's many gifts was the fact that he was a survivor. He was a wily, crafty man, and he made himself so valuable, and there was so much money to be made by his efforts and so much military force to be wielded by his efforts that even Octavian could not do away with Herod. And Herod transferred the same kind of vigorous loyalty that he had for Antony. He immediately switched that to Octavian, and that's where the New Testament finds him in our story. Octavian is still the emperor. He's now known as Augustus. He has lasted for decades, and Herod has become his right arm in the east, and he has ruled continually for several decades. He ended up ruling for like 33 years. He has ruled that part of the world ruthlessly and viciously, in such a way that he could believably be portrayed in this passage as wanting to try to kill the innocent children of Judah, of the Judean people, the Jewish people. Herod is also known as the guy who created Masada, the fortress overseeing the Dead Sea, as well as a whole string of fortresses all along the border that was sort of the bulwark against invasion from the east, the Parthian Empire that wanted to come over from Persia and attack Rome. Herod was the guy who kept the barbarians at the gate, so to speak. And he was also famously known for expanding the temple. When Jesus goes up to the temple and is out there clearing out the courtyards of all the people, the money changers who are exchanging money for inflated rates of exchange, and who are charging people for sheep and goats exorbitant amounts, like getting a $7 Coke at Disney World. That when Jesus does that, he does that on the expanded Temple Mount that Herod had built, and the most holy site still to this day within Judaism, that is the western wall of the Temple Mount. That was Herod's creation. That's the only thing that's left standing of the old temple. Herod made that wall. It's a retaining wall that holds up the superstructure of the mountain, the landfill that Herod built around the Mount Zion in order to expand the premises so that more activities and more business could take place on that. That's what was a small piece of ground, but he made it 5 or 6 times the size of normal. So he's a great builder. He is a great military leader. He is a political conniver. He is a survivor. He's extremely successful, and above all, he is dangerous. He is very dangerous. And thus we find him in this passage coming after the baby Jesus, and in his attempt to get at the baby Jesus, he is willing to sacrifice the lives of all of the children, all of the male children, just like Pharaoh before him, of all of the children of his own people, in order to secure his own place. Because if this baby is the Messiah, what does it mean if you're the leader of the Jewish people? Well, it means a pink slip. It means you're going to be set out to pasture, because Messiah isn't going to play second fiddle to any king, no matter how ruthless, no matter how much of a conniver, no matter how many fortresses that were built, no matter how many public works, no matter how much money you produce, no matter the size of the army. Messiah is going to lead, and Herod fears Messiah's leadership, and thus goes to take out the baby Jesus. Now, Herod represents, theologically, it's kind of a metaphor for anyone who wants to shut out the light, because that's what's going on here, is that no sooner is the light come into the world that somebody wants to come in and snuff it out. And Herod represents all of those forces in the world that want to snuff out the light in people's lives, the people that want to engage in rapacious practices of business, the people that want to take the young people of the world and use them to further their political aims and ends and their own personal interests on fields of battle, the people who in their labor practices and in the way that they compensate their employees, who don't take care of the folks that work for them. Herod represents all of those people and so many more, because Herod also represents, on a much smaller scale, anybody who wants to shut out the light in any individual's life. And sometimes that can even be inside churches. Now, you see it a lot of times. The prototypical example in the movies or in literature is in small towns. You know, somebody wants to go to Broadway, or somebody wants to go to college, and it's a regular feature of literature. And what does everybody say? Everybody says, well, you know, nobody from Branford ever gets to Hollywood. You know, I mean, you can get to Hollywood if you're from New York or maybe even from Pittsburgh or something, but nobody goes from a little town outside of Lake City, Florida, and gets to the big time. And going to college, I mean, nobody in your family's ever been to college before. You come from a whole line of people that are just working class, 8th grade education people. How could it be that you would think yourself good enough to go off and do something like that? The people that do that they wouldn't consider themselves Herods, but they are Herods, because that's what Herod does. Herod snuffs out the light. And like I said, it happens even in churches. amongst very good people. And some of the worst of this activity happens in congregations, unfortunately. You see it anytime there's somebody that's made a public mistake, especially somebody that's committed a crime, somebody that has succumbed to addiction and everybody knows about the addiction, somebody that's made a big mistake and everybody knows about it. In such circumstances, people often become extremely judgmental and see those kinds of errors as being determinative of the entire trajectory of someone's life. And that's why when you talk to people out there in the world, they talk about, you say, well, why don't you come to church and why don't you come be with us? And what do they say? They say, well, I can't go be around all those holy people. I can't come inside the church because the impression that they get from the holy people is that you have to be holy. So that rather than being a place like the church ought to be, that is a hospital for people with soul sickness who are all in recovery ourselves. Instead, it's a place for holy people where you get yourself cleaned up and you clean up everything else, and then you come in after you're holy. After you're already made, after you're already perfect, after you're acceptable, after you wear the right kind of clothes, or have the right kind of haircut, or have the right kind of criminal background, or after you've been sober long enough, then you can come and be part of this community, because the community often won't accept you, and the people know it. And that's amongst the righteous people. That's one of our sins, is that kind of judgmentalism. We don't consider ourselves Herods, but we often can be. And so, there's a deep and powerful moral lesson about watching ourselves, lest we fall into the trap of becoming Herods, lest we snuff out the light in somebody else's life, lest we crush somebody else's dreams, or crush somebody else's aspirations, or undermine their attempts to do better, or to expand their horizons, or to go to the next level in their own spirituality, their own career, their own relationships, whatever. We don't want to be that kind of people. We don't want to have anything to do whatsoever with Herod. And so, instead, we're supposed to be people that are, instead of snuffing out the light, we're the people who are running around and saying, let me give you a light. we're the people with the lighter in our pocket saying, let me light you up there. Let me help your aspirations. Let me mentor you. Let me help you with your goals. Let me help you get to the place where you need to be in your own life. Let me give you the kinds of tools that you need, because maybe I have some of those in my toolkit that you can borrow such that you can get to that next place. That's the kind of people that we're supposed to be. The exact antithesis of what Herod is and what Herod is all about. Now, I also want to say something about the journey. Because what Jesus is forced into, after being born, Jesus is forced into the unexpected journey. He's forced to go to a place where he does not want to go. He's forced to go to a place where neither he nor anybody around him had thought that he might ever have to go. But he's nonetheless forced to because of circumstances. And that unexpected journey that Jesus goes on is a metaphor for those kinds of places in our own lives when we have to do things and experience things and go through things that we hadn't planned for, that we didn't look for, that we didn't want, but that are nonetheless, because of circumstances, thrust upon us. I've been on one of those kind of journeys myself. I wake up just about every day of the morning and say, what in the world am I doing in Egypt? I did not want to go. I did not want ever to go to Egypt. It was not on my calendar. I don't have time for this. I don't have the energy for it. I've got all kinds of things that I want to get done with my life, and instead, I'm having to go to Egypt. And it's a very painful thing. And maybe some of you have experienced that as well, where you thought life was going in this one particular direction, and all of a sudden, boom, you ended up going in another trajectory altogether not because you wanted to, but because you were forced to, because of illness or accident or some other circumstance, financial or otherwise, that was thrust upon you that changed everything that you'd ever thought you would be and everything that you thought you would ever do in your own life. This story of Jesus about making that unexpected journey is a metaphor for those kinds of places in our own life. I've said to the Lord, let me get up out of Egypt. Let me be delivered from this. At least, Lord, let me live long enough to see Hillary in the White House. Things like that. Goals that you had for yourself. I want to be able to live long enough to have one of those cars that drives you around with the computer. I thought, well, if I can live to be 70, they'll have created enough of those things, and there would have been a price point that would have been lowered sufficient so that a guy like me could afford to maybe get a used Google car to take me to the mall or to a movie or to a ball game or something whenever I wanted to go. And so, going to Egypt was not in the cards, man. I didn't want that, and but it's nonetheless it's now part of my experience, and it's one of the ways in which when we talk about Jesus having lived the kind of life that the rest of us also have to live, it's one of the important aspects of our own theology, because what we claim in our confessions about Jesus is not that Jesus lived some kind of pampered existence that was separate from trouble, that was isolated, that he lived in some kind of a bubble with some sort of set of superpowers that allowed him to get out of things that we normally otherwise would experience. I saw a cartoon on Facebook last night where Mary is standing over the baby Jesus who's in a tub of water, and the baby Jesus is standing on the water, and Mary says, "In." Because the baby Jesus, and that's what that exposes is the kind of ways that we often think about the baby Jesus. We don't think about him as being vulnerable. We don't think about his life being dangerous. We don't think about his life and his existence being precarious. We see it from the other side and say, oh, well, he didn't, he was fine, he was good, he was golden from the moment of his birth. That's not the way the text presents it. The text presents it as him and his family being in peril, and him needing to get out of Bethlehem as quickly as possible because his life was in trouble. And thus, it is a result in our own confessions that we can say about Jesus, that he didn't live in a bubble, that he had to go down into Egypt his own self. He had to make that journey, that painful, unavoidable journey that was thrust upon him, as so many of us have had things thrust upon us. But then I think the metaphor is continued, because when Jesus goes, Jesus doesn't go by himself when he goes down into Egypt. First of all, he goes under the power of the Holy Spirit. It is the Spirit of God that directs him and goes with him every step of the way down into Egypt. And that's one of the joys of our faith, and one of the great reasons to have a faith life and to have the kind of trust that we have in the God who is our Creator, Sustainer, and Redeemer. Because when we go to these places of danger, when we go to these situations of peril and great anxiety, we don't go by ourselves, that we go with the power of the Holy Spirit undergirding us and being with us every step of the way. And I tell you, a lot of people have asked me, how are you dealing with this? It's very upsetting. It's very upsetting. But I can tell you that my faith has meant more to me in the last 90 days than in the entire 51 years that I've ever lived on this planet. I promise you. Because when you got to go to Egypt, you need somebody to go with you. And when you've got that you know that you can make it down into Egypt. And you'll be all right, no matter what happens when you're there. But there's also a powerful metaphor, because it isn't just that when Jesus goes down into the land of Egypt that he goes with God. Even Jesus needs companions. And Mary and Joseph are a metaphor for the companions that walk with us on our journey, that we require to make that journey. Even Jesus doesn't go by himself. He goes with the strength and love and caring and concern of his parents, who are his companions, as he makes that unexpected journey. They go with him. They don't abandon him. They don't say, man, it's been great and everything, but this Herod guy, he's really dangerous. They don't throw their kid under the bus. They go with him because they are with him not just in word but also in deed. Talk is cheap in such situations. You know what I mean? Talk is cheap, but it is another thing altogether to commit yourself to be with someone as they move through the difficulty that now lies before them. I know in my own experience that's something that I've experienced quite powerfully in the last few months, probably more so. Again, everything right now is heightened. Every experience, every meal, every encounter, under my present set of circumstances, everything is realer in a way that has never been so before. Nothing is just background noise. It's all to the front. I have the most wonderful companion in the world to walk with me, who manages my schedule and my meds and our home and all of the stuff that's gone on in our lives. In addition to her own trip down into Egypt, she's walking there with me. And I am forever grateful for her presence in my life. But I'm also grateful for yours.
Well, you are.
I'm grateful for yours too, sweetie. I am. Because what has happened is that I've experienced a whole community of people who have become deeply concerned with the things that are going on in my life and that have brought us food, who have helped us financially, who have helped us medically, who have helped us legally. People came and even decorated our house for Christmas. I have a little statue of the Buddha, and somebody even put a Santa hat on my yard Buddha. I have the most festive Buddha statue in all of Northeast Florida. And I have that because I have faithful companions. I've got the Marys and the Josephs in my own life because you all have done that. And I think that this passage it's a whole series of metaphors, but it's a metaphor for the ways in which in our own spirituality we're either going down into Egypt ourselves, or we are called to be the companion to someone or groups of people who are also going down to Egypt themselves. Because there are stories all over this congregation of others who have made this walk to Egypt. The Sanford family has walked into Egypt this week with the death of your dear sister. And the Lorton family has walked into Egypt this week with the death of Brother John. There are many of you that are walking the same road to Egypt with cancer and with other ailments. Many of you have family members who are walking that road and who you are having to watch at a little bit of a remove go into that kind of journey themselves. Sisters and brothers, it is our task of discipleship to be looking for situations where we can be that kind of blessing to one another as people make that deep journey into a great place of pain and suffering and perhaps great catastrophe and disaster. It is part of the discipleship life of the community of faith that we grow ourselves into such people who are not so self-absorbed with our own cares and concerns, but that there is always something left for others. It is not that we are supposed to be selfless, that we are supposed to ignore our own selves, ignore our lives, ignore our finances, ignore our health, etc., but rather so that there is a reserve, so that there is something left, so that even in our distress, even in our difficult places, it's my task as your pastor to still walk with you into Egypt, even as I'm walking there myself. Do you hear what I'm saying? That none of us get out of this. It's all of us who have to be looking for this and looking for opportunities to mentor, to help, to be a blessing, to encourage, to inspire. That's who we are called to be. In a world that is much self-absorbed, in a world that says you need to simply focus on your own self and get as much as you possibly can, because if you don't, your neighbor will take it out from under you. We are called to model a kind of life to the world so that people will look at us and will say, my, aren't those people holy and I can't have anything to do with them? Instead, they will say, my, aren't those people so filled with grace and concern and compassion that I want to walk with them as I go into Egypt. And I want to be someone who learns how to walk that way with Egypt, with someone else as they go into Egypt. May God help us to take this passage to heart. It's a painful and difficult passage, but it is one that is rich with metaphor that I believe can sustain us through difficult times in our own spirituality. May God help us to be that kind of congregation and that kind of church that exemplifies this concern for others and this willingness to reach out beyond ourselves, even in the midst of difficulty and suffering. Amen.